you were a big part of the development of the NextGen car, am I right? And so, is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, the group there, the credit really goes to John Probst and all the folks there at the R&D Center, Brandon Thomas and Dr. Eric Jacuzzi. And, this car, unlike cars in the past where race teams did all that design and develop and manufacturing, now the sanctioning body, we're heavily involved. I mean, there's three partners, if you will, in the process. You have us, you have the vendor, that could be an X-Track, that could be a BBS Wheels, that could be your 5-star manufacturer, and you have the race team. So the three of us, and one thing, not to get off this topic, but I think one thing that our industry does today that we're so much better than we have been ever is the collaboration between the stakeholders, whether it be our TV partners, our tracks, the vendors, and how we got to where we are today with the NextGen car, from the safety aspect and every bit of that, and having everybody, it is different. The DNA between the walls at the race shops of what you used to do, that was fun. I mean, you could build your own stuff, you could change stuff, but that was not a financial model that was going to be sustainable long term.
So with this NextGen car, it changed the whole process, I guess, around officiating. And I imagine for you lived on both sides of it, right? Officiating those cars that were pieces people created, and they would bring them and have to see if they fit everything. And now you got a car that should fit, right? When it rolls off the trailer, there should be no problems, right? Yep. Does that feels like or sounds like that seems to have made things easier?
Sure.
Or harder in some cases?
I would say easier. The challenge still is the race team's understanding that with this car and the deterrent model that was put in place to save, the garage from themselves, it's up to us, as Mr. Francis said, we have to enforce the rules on this car. And the DNA within the walls of the race team has to adapt to the way this car has to be raced. Yeah. When you start messing with stuff, you're going to get in trouble.
It seems like that out of the gate there were a few offenses and people were trying, and found a couple things. But here, I can't remember the last time that we've had a car with an obvious, go back to R&D Center and have an obvious trick, right? Yeah. Do you see that culture changing?
I do. I mean, if you think about it, we're in year 3, right? I think year 1, it took them a little while, the teams that get all the parts and pieces, they're just trying to figure out how to bolt them together and go race. Yeah. So last year we felt like, okay, they've had the car for a year.
Smart.
Yeah, they've learned a lot about what we're doing. Yeah. They're going to try to figure this out. But that really put us in a position that, and Steve O'Donnell and I and Steve Phelps had a conversation and said, I think we have got to write these penalties now. I believe, fingers crossed, we'll get them to a place where everybody in the garage feels like, don't do that. Just stay away from that stuff. And knock on wood, I feel like the garage understands that that's the way we're going to officiate this car. And there's really 2 things that we do on a race weekend as a sanctioning body. We inspect vehicles and we officiate the race. That's really the 2 things. And when we're hiring an official, you need to be a good official for the races, and you need to be a technical inspector, and they're doing 3 garages. They're doing trucks, they're doing Xfinity, and doing Cups. So that task of understanding the rules in all the garages is important. But to your question, the NextGen car, there's a homologated parts and pieces that everybody has to run. It's like going to the grocery store and taking your cart and everybody put all their stuff in it, and you go home and you just put it together and you cook your meal and you put your car together and you go race.
Yeah. So in terms of what is your role in competition in terms of changes, right? So, and I'm going toward the short track package, right? Yep. And we've had, there's been a ton of, there's been testing and a lot of things have been tried. There's been some things learned, but then we had Bristol happen, right? Which was a happy accident, whatever you want to call it. How involved, I guess, or how much influence do you have in any competition changes?
Yeah, I mean it's a collective group.
Yeah.
I mean our group at the R&D Center collectively is run by John Probst. All the R&D stuff that goes on in the back, all the competition related stuff that we go to the racetrack. But we sit as a group and we talk about all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And to your point, we've done a lot of testing with the rear diffuser. We went to Richmond last year and changed a lot of aero bits, if you will,
right.
and never seemed to be able to move the needle. And that's going to be difficult on short racetracks, as you well know. I mean, the speed in the center of the corner from an aero standpoint, in Martinsville, you're running, 40, 50, 60 miles an hour in the middle of the corner. So to think you're going to move the needle dramatically is going to be difficult. But to your point, kind of a blessing in disguise. And we had been on this working closely with our partners at Goodyear was the tires. We never thought going to Bristol this last time that we would have had. We didn't go into the weekend thinking this is what it would look like.
Right.
We went into the weekend very thinking early on, green racetrack, you're going to have some tire wear.
Was this tire different than? I mean, it was the same tire we ran at Bristol before. What created that scenario?
I think is you look at the temperature. It was much cooler. Same tire, and for whatever reason, still working through that with Goodyear to figure out why the left side tires were not wearing a little bit different track treatment than what we'd had in the past with the PJ1 versus the resin. When you start putting all that stuff on the table and really dissecting what moved the needle, that formula, trying to box that up and keep it, the end result is we feel like that's where we have to get with the tire. That's why we're doing things at Wilkesboro at the All-Star race with the option tire that is basically the wet weather rubber put on a slick tire.
And all right, so you're trying to go to Wilkesboro, and y'all will more. I guess would it be fair to say that you'll be paying more attention to what happens to that tire versus whether option versus hard makes a better race or any of the strategies?
Absolutely.
None of that.
It's really
about how does this tire handle?
That's right. As we go, we're preparing now, right? You get the tires laid out. Here's the sets you get. We're going to have a practice session. They get, one of each. We're going to have a qualifying session. But to your point, our focus, we want to see a great race.
Sure.
But from the sanctioning body, we'll learn something when we leave Wilkesboro that Sunday night. We'll have a data point. Hopefully it sends us in a direction that, okay, this is where we need to go.
Yeah.
And based off other events, if you take, obviously, Bristol, great data point, then we go to Richmond where we start the race on wet weather tires. The first 30 laps of that race at Richmond, it looked like Richmond of old.
It was great.
They were all over the place.
All over the place, yeah.
So, okay, you take that, and we start to see we're not changing aero bits. We're still at, close to 700 horsepower. So, the dialogue around we need 1,000 horsepower, there's going to be significant cost to put 1,000 horsepower in these cars. It just is. I know there's debate back and forth, but it's going to happen. So if we can get to where we want to be with the tire, working closely with Goodyear, and we feel like we can because we see it. So continuing to push hard in that area to get us the type of racing on the short tracks that our fans deserve and our competitors want to see, like we just saw at Kansas last weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, that place has really turned into a great race.
So I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around cooler temperatures being a factor in what we saw at Bristol, and I want to hope, I want to believe, but if we had 20 degrees warmer temperatures, we would have had basically the. Yeah,
I think that's a fair assessment. I think it's just part of the equation.
How does Goodyear know where to get to?
Yeah. I think that's fair. That's a data point with temperature that was different. The other thing that, as I said earlier, the difference was the track treatment, PJ1 versus the resin. Mm-hmm. And the reason, not to get off topic, the reason the track treatment was different is Bristol became a wet weather track.
Yeah, we couldn't have that.
And you can't run the PJ1 in wet. I mean, it would be way too slick. It beads
up on top of it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you start putting all of that in the equation, whether it's temperature, whether it's resin, and you start, laying that out to people that's a lot smarter than me from an engineering perspective, and trying to get to that place. If the testing at Wilkesboro with the tire that will be the option tire, if the testing, what we've done and the results of those tests, then we're going to see some things at the All-Star race that we're going to be really happy about.
What did you see at the test?
Well, it's like they're going to have to manage that option tire from day one.
Take it easy.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be like years ago, you go to Rockingham and Darlington.
Dude, I love that's the only kind of races I run in the late model stock cars where I know that it'll burn the tires off of it if you drive it like an idiot.
And that's what we saw at Bristol. You could see the veterans. You could see Truex and Brad and Denny.
It was beautiful.
And Ty Ty Gibbs did a great job, had a fast car, but you could say, okay, that's not going to work for you. You better start managing it.
Yes.
But I think to your point, that's what we need to get to.
Yeah. No, that was great. I guess the only other thing I kind of wanted to ask you about was the Adam Stern had some tweets about hybrids. I mean, is that a real, watching fan reaction to those comments, most people are like, hey, it's in other forms of motorsport and it's on the highway. No, people think it's a big deal. It's not going to be a big deal. And I know that when they started developing the NextGen car, they developed it with the option, right, to have be open to be able to add that technology.
Sure.
NASCAR wanted to develop a vehicle that could accept that technology if that was where we had to go, right? Is that something? I mean, I know we've heard O'Donnell talk about different fuels and different, researching and traveling all over the globe to try to find out what the next step is.
Sure.
Where do you think we are in that? How heavy is the conversation around that?
I think it is conversation. I think to your point, this car, a lot of thought and design went into it, not for just what we're doing today, but what are we going to do in the future with sustainable fuels, and what are we going to do with hybrids and BEVs and things of that nature. So, and new OEMs coming in. I mean, that's one thing that's really. I mean, we have great partners in Chevy and Ford and Toyota, and they've been with us forever.
Yeah.
But we need a platform that will invite some new OEMs to come and participate. They love the NextGen car. The one thing that they're not going to do is they're not going to build a V8 pushrod engine. So we have to continue to develop and look at different platforms and options that will be inviting to those OEMs.
So a new manufacturer will not join NASCAR if it's a pushrod V8.
That's in the conversations that our folks, John Probst and OD and that group have had. That's a deal breaker right there. Where when Toyota came in, they actually didn't have that engine and developed it and built it for the truck. So kudos to them. Yeah. That's just not the world we live in today.
Wow. What kind of motor do they want us to build?
Well, they're on a different. They're turbocharged. So we've got to be prepared from a sanctioning body, very similar to our sister company at IMSA. And how does balance of performance work? I mean, for 75 plus years, we've raced the same type of engines, naturally aspirated, carburetors, cubic inches are all right there. So from an officiating standpoint, that's been fairly easy to police. When you venture into the balance of performance and torque sensors and horsepower and torque at the rear tire, that's a different way to police your sport. But we're going to have to figure out how that looks to be able to get new OEMs to come in.
Wow. Okay, I didn't think about that. So there could be a scenario where a new manufacturer comes in with a different style power plant
Yes.
compared to another manufacturer, and then you would then do what you do similarly in IMSA.
Yeah, you would have to look at how do you balance that? And everybody's.
It reminds me a lot. Sorry to interrupt you. It reminds me a lot of it's different, but I would think it'd be very similar to when Dodge came back in.
Yeah. Yep.
And everybody, like even the Fords had different spoilers than the Chevys, and the Dodges had different valences than everybody else. And other people, some had more kick out, were allowed more. You had a bit of that balance of power going on with the aero side of things back in the early 2000s and the late 90s.
Oh, that's a great point. I think the next-gen car has helped us from that aero side of it to keep all three in the same box, right? So we would have to venture and those steps on the engine architecture side to be able to do that same thing. And that's that'll be challenging, but it will take all of our partners on the OEM side to all kind of buy in to be able to do that.
Wow, that's something.